Welcome to Brain Power with Dr. Echo, where each week we discuss how your family can boost brain health by addressing mind, body, emotional, and environmental health. And now here's the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Brain Power with Dr. Echo. It's my pleasure to introduce you to the guest I have today. She's an amazing physician, Dr. Samara Potter, and I'm so glad she's here with us. So without further ado, welcome Samara to our podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
So would you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. So, as mentioned, my name is Samara Potter. I am a pediatric oncologist, and which means that I take care of kids with cancer as my day job. I am also a researcher, so I spend a lot of time doing scientific research and trying to figure out why it is that kids get cancer and how we can better treat them. And then I also have a couple of other hats that I wear. So I am a certified life coach, and I'm a life coach for women physicians and also for moms of children with cancer. And otherwise, I'm one of those serial entrepreneurs, always into something, real estate investor, and a mom of two kids and part of a two-physician household. So that's that's the craziness that is my life.
Wow, that's wonderful. So first of all, thank you for the work that you do taking care of kids and the parents, which is so critical. Parents of kids with cancer, because that's such a heartbreaking thing for parents to go through. And so thank you for doing that.
Oh, thank you for all that you're doing. And I know the parents who are listening to your podcast are getting so much benefit out of all the wisdom that you're sharing.
My pleasure. Thank you. And so before we came on, we were chatting about how negative self-talk affects us as parents. And so I wanted to talk more about that because that's something that's I mean, for anybody that's alive, I think everybody has negative self-talk at some point in life. So can you walk us through how you approach it and how you help parents get on the other side of the negative self-talk that they have?
Yeah. So I try to let the parent lead, but what I find is a common thing that people will say without necessarily coming out right and saying it is that they have these ideas of what they should or should not be doing, right? So this idea of, to be a good mom means that I should be going to all the PTA meetings or whatever it is, or that my child should always be taking their medication on time, or, it really doesn't matter what it is, but these ideas, these kind of shoulds, which I try to ask my clients and myself when I'm coaching myself to take that word should out of the equation. I think that's the quickest way to remind your brain that you have choice, you have agency. Should to me sounds like it's coming from an external source. It's like somebody else is looking at me and judging me and saying, you are not doing the right thing. And of course, anytime someone says that to you or you say that to yourself, you aren't able to function, I think, at your highest level.
Yeah.
So, so I always encourage people to take should and insert another word. So I say can, get to, choose to, want to, right? And just putting in another word and just stopping yourself whenever you're going, oh, I should do this, I should do that. I can do that if I want. But suddenly it just honestly, even just saying that in the moment in my body, it goes from a feeling of heaviness in my shoulders to suddenly feeling a lot lighter. And that's what I want for all parents, because there's no playbook, right? We are all blessed with the child and we bring them home and we go, oh my gosh, someone has allowed me to have this responsibility and it's real, and we're all just figuring it out. And, we have a lot of expectations from society and from our parents and from other people that we picked up along the way. And I think just reminding ourselves that that's a choice whether or not we want to hold on to some of those expectations or not. It just makes everything a little bit easier and feeling a little bit lower stakes.
Right. And I think it's important to realize that the realization that we have the choice is actually most of the issue, right? A lot of times we go through life not realizing we have a choice and we just feel like we're stuck. So we're giving you permission to realize that you have a choice.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So when you're thinking, have you found any way that helps you when the thoughts fly into your mind and then before you slide down the rabbit hole of ruminating on it, how do you stop yourself?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of different there's a couple of different ways to go about things. I think that first of all, sometimes when I'm, if I'm upset about something, I think that there's a lot of in coaching, there's a lot of people who will think, okay, well, this is a negative feeling that someone's happening, and I want them to stop that negative feeling, so I'm trying to cut that off immediately. Whereas I sometimes will actually lean into it and just say, you know what, I'm feeling crummy, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling whatever, and I just need to express that in one way or another, right?
Right.
Whether that, just talking to your friend and just saying, all this stuff happened and I'm just really not happy about it, and getting that out first before I kind of go and try to change the mindset. That I don't know, that's how I deal with it, because what I find is that when I just try to switch and say, okay, well, I'm in this cycle and I just want to, stop having the cycle, then it's almost like I'm blaming myself for even having the feeling to begin with. And it's the judgment on top of the problem makes just an extra shame sandwich that we don't need, because you're already feeling a negative emotion, right? And then you're upset because you're feeling a negative emotion, and then and you should know better, right? There's the shoulding again. And so, I sometimes I just say, you know what? Life's 50-50. Sometimes I feel good, sometimes I don't. And it's important to acknowledge the times that I don't, and that's okay. And once, take a set amount of time to kind of get that out of your system and then say, okay, so now we're moving on, right? And I find that just acknowledging that helps me a lot in moving forward. When I try to repress it, that's when I find myself just kind of ruminating, coming back to that idea over and over again when I don't just let it out.
Yeah, that helps, I'm sure. And I was reading the book Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod, and he mentioned that he gives himself 5 minutes to feel the feels, to do all the jumping up and down and the screaming and the yelling. And then after that, yes, we have to, okay, it's happened. Now what do we do? We have to, how do we move forward from here? But yes, he gives himself the time to feel it.
Yeah, that's a great book. But it's really interesting when you said that. It kind of reminded me of that. It's the difference between, gratitude and toxic positivity, right? You can is the acknowledgement part first, right? Like that acknowledgement that it's okay to feel however it is that you feel, right?
Right.
The toxic positivity is when you're saying, I feel crummy, but then, someone's saying, well, you shouldn't feel that way. Look at all the stuff you should be grateful for, again, should,
Right.
right? Versus, you know, you're not really able to get to gratitude unless you say, you know what, I feel crummy, and
And I have found that things never last. They get better after some time. Yeah.
yeah. And sometimes things are just crummy, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I learned from one of my mentors, Dr. Amen of the Amen clinics. He talks about automatic negative thoughts. And he says, when you have a negative thought jump in your head, you should learn to stop yourself and ask the question, is this true? And then usually your first answer will be yeah, because you're still in that state. And then if you ask yourself again, is this really true? And at that point, the questions are breaking that thought up, right? And so it doesn't continue the cycle. So then when you ask yourself the second time, is this really true? At that point, hopefully you've gotten enough, you felt enough of your field, and since that thought has been broken, now you can actually realize that it's actually not true, right? And then you can tell yourself what the truth is. And
Yeah. Yeah. I was trained at the life coach school, and we have something called the model. And one of the first things that we do when you're having a thought or something that's upsetting you is the first step in the model is to find this, what they call the circumstance, which they mean as just the facts, right? You're in a court of law, just the facts, right? and that's, I think, one of the hardest steps for people is really figuring out what is an actual fact, what is the truth part of this, right? Versus what is all the feeling and all the stress and the emotions that we're injecting into it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's wonderful. So, how do you, for any parents that might be listening and their children have cancer or have had cancer and they're walking through the journey and the process, what are some ways that you help support them?
Yeah. I think the first thing that I tried to do is to remind them to have compassion for themselves,
Yeah.
right? So many people and, parent mothers who are going through this, we think so much about our children and about all the other people that we're taking care of. And I think that's has a lot to do with our society and what our society defines as a good mother, right? Is the person who puts other people first and herself last, right? Although we know that that doesn't work, right? Because you can't pour from an empty cup, but that's, that's a societal norm that a lot of us have become ingrained with. And so just having compassion for yourself and reminding yourself, you know, it's okay. It's okay that I am stressed out. It's normal that I don't know what to do. It's normal to feel scared. And to have that compassion that you don't have to feel so overwhelmed with caring, trying to be the person who's strong, I should say. And, you know, I think that happens to mothers no matter whether their children have cancer or any sort of illness, and it doesn't have to be a severe illness. It can be transient, right? I recently had a situation where my son ended up choking in a restaurant, which was very stressful for all of us. And I had a lot of the same thoughts and feelings of, well, I have to be strong and I have to be calm because I'm holding it together for everyone else. It was really interesting kind of being on the other end of it and reminding myself that no, I needed to give myself permission to have time to be sad and be scared and be frustrated, and maybe not in the emergent moment, right? When I'm with my son in the ambulance, but when he's safe and I have time, to take that time for myself. And so that's one of the things I also ask people to do is to try to schedule time, and especially if you're going through something where you're having a life change, whether it's a new diagnosis or whatever it is
Mm.
that is upsetting, scheduling time to grieve for whatever reason, whether it's for the life that you thought you were going to have that you don't think that you're going to be able to have anymore,
Mm.
or for whatever sadness you have about your child or your family or whatever it is, that you scheduling that time for yourself to grieve, right? And not just to take a walk or do yoga or whatever those things, but really just to have time to just be sad. And that is an okay and necessary part of dealing with whatever it is that you're going through.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I like that. And I think I'm gonna start sharing that with my parents because I give a diagnosis of ADHD or autism, and the parents are often, a lot of them are, maybe they figured, but they didn't really want to accept it, and now they hear it from my mouth, and I try to say it as gently as I can, but still, they grieve the life of that they thought they would have, right? When we all have the babies, and we're like, oh, and then they grow up, and this thing you weren't expecting happens. So yeah, I'm gonna use that because I think it's important for them to schedule and to feel all the feels that they need because it's
Yeah,
right, they're about to go on, and so it will help equip them for the journey ahead. So
yeah, and reminding them that there's no scheduled timeline for that, right? Because I was just talking with, I have a Facebook group for mothers of children with cancer, and I was talking to them on one of our scheduled calls, and some of them were saying, well, it's been a couple of years since my child's diagnosis, and they're doing better now and everything's happening, and but I don't feel better, right? And I'm not better yet, and why am I not over this, right? And it goes back to that that I should be over this, right? That there's an expected timeline on your grief and your processing, and and I explained it's totally different for everyone. And sometimes people don't have the capacity to process in the moment, right? Sometimes you're dealing with whatever it is that you're dealing with, and you're just trying to get your kid to a place, and you don't actually have time to process it, and you don't start to process it until later, and it might be years later.
Yeah.
And that's okay because you did what you needed to do, right? So I think just again having compassion for yourself, and reminding yourself there's not a timeline. Everybody takes the time that they need.
Absolutely. And that you're worth it. You're valuable enough to take that time for yourself. And it doesn't mean you love anybody else less because you're taking the time for yourself.
Yeah, and I see that
You-
there's a lot of guilt for moms for that, but I try to remind them, especially, you know, those with daughters, and it's just that, is this how you want your daughter to treat herself when she gets older, right? Because
But we're teaching them, they soak up all
I
that
mean,
we're doing actually more than what we say.
yeah, for better or for worse, kids learn by watching. I mean, I think every mom knows that there's some part of kids that don't actually listen, which is why we had to tell them to put on their socks 5 times. But they do watch, right? And they watch and they learn from you with how you treat yourself. But that's how they think that a mom should be, right? And that's how they think you know, that they want to model themselves later. And so I think that just taking the time for yourself, doing whatever it is that you love. We were talking a little earlier before we started recording about the fact that I recently started a new creative hobby, right? I had been very creative before medical school. I was an art history major, and I used to love photography and stuff, but I never really done much drawing or painting. And I decided a couple of months, I guess 2 months ago, that I was going to start painting, and I just did it. And it's been the best thing. Incredible for my mental health. It's been also, I think, a really nice way to show my kids that, yeah, I'm going to take time for myself to do something that I enjoy. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, it's so wonderful. Yes, I know. I saw your painting on Facebook. I was like, oh my goodness. It looks
Yeah.
good. And I like what you were saying before we started recording about how this is like a form of meditation for you,
Mhm.
and it gives you such calm and peace, and that you couldn't meditate in the traditional sense of the word before, but now you found a way to do that gives you the same effect, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's important so that we're not boxing ourselves into again how we should meditate, right?
Yeah.
We're checking-
Absolutely. I've always liked the idea of meditating, right? It's one of those things that people who love it, they get so much value from it. And I always thought, I would love to be someone who does that. But much like my aspirations to be an early riser, it's just not my thing, right? And people accept that about myself. But
I-
I can meditate through doing art or doing other things where I get into a state of flow, and that what works for me, and that's perfectly fine. It's a great outlet for me, and I like it because not only do I get to do my art, but now, my daughter comes and she'll sit down next to me, and so she'll do an art project too. And so then we're also spending time together, which is fun.
Yes, you're bonding for sure. That's wonderful. Wow. We've talked about so many important things. And so parents listening, I would just pick one thing that you can start working on, even if it's the self-compassion, have compassion on yourself, or schedule time for you to feel all the feels that you need to feel, or find a way to meditate that doesn't fit the box, right? If it's going for a walk, go for the walk.
talk to yourself. That's meditation. Because really, we have to define it for ourselves and not to, it's not one shoe fit, so, or one size fits. Do you have one last, I ask all my guests, what's your last brain health tip? Because everything you've said here is going to help all the parents and us listening and talking to you, and it's going to help us with our brain health and helping our brains function better. So what's one last tip you have?
Okay, I'll give you a tip because there's a lot of parents who are listening that they can use for themselves, but also that they can use with their kids, which is kind of a way of interrupting, you kind of asked before, well, what happens when you're spiraling, right? And you're just kind of going over and over in the same sort of negative thought. And there's something that you can do. And I learned this from Melissa Tiers, who's a hypnotist in New York and very, very well published, but it's actually a neuroscience technique where you actually take an object, and I use my phone because that's what I always have on me, and you just kind of swing your arm out to the side and cross the midline and out to the other side. And what happens is because you're switching the sides of your brain, right? That you are crossing midline, it ends up being that whatever pattern that you've had of thought or anxiety, you end up kind of interrupting that by doing this switching. And I just do it until I feel kind of more calm and in a more neutral state. And I like it because you can teach kids to do it, so kids can do it in the hospital, right? They're getting really anxious, they're going to get a poke or something that they're worried about, and they can always grab, a little bean bag or a hacky sack or something and just pass it back and forth, and it can just be a nice way of soothing themselves and just interrupting that pattern.
I'm gonna teach that to my parents of my kids with ADHD. Oh my goodness, yeah, because there's a lot of anxiety associated with our children that have those diagnoses. So thank you. I'm going to use that one. So please tell our listeners where they can find out more about you and coaching services that you have.
So I have a website and it's www.motheringthrough.com. And you can also find me on Instagram. I'm at Kid Cancer Coach. And then also I have a podcast also called Mothering Through Childhood Cancer is what it's actually called, the full name. And so you can find me through any of those arenas.
Wow, wonderful. So we're going to post all of that in the show notes. And thank you again for what you do. Thank you for coming on and sharing these nuggets with us. Really grateful.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And parents listening, please share this episode with your friends, your family, and people you know that need to hear this. And we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.